Gentlemen, welcome back to the shop today. A treat especial. Fooled him again. They let this snow Mexican in through the hole in the border. I went down to the US&A to get myself a Ratchet earthquake, which is not the inner city kind due to highly caloric meals and so forth, but it is from the hazard fart, much like going to the taco hell and you're not quite sure if it's safe to or not. We'll get into the meat of her, see if she's any fucking good at all. They are trying to, they're pretty good at this, getting the last nickel out of your plug dime. As we can see, they also sell Band-Aids. Jesus sacks, look at that. Ready to cut you right half in two. We'll just avoid that altogether. Who's up for some sodomy? Always. And also never. Tougher than she looks. Just like my last Ratchet. It's coming. So too is Christmas. A lot of shill's been on my case getting me to do some hazard fart. I don't begrudge anybody a living, you know, shills, they gotta write comments too. This is not going as planned. There, that did it. Time. Remember, Santa's watching, dirty old bastard. We won't read the manual because that's like cheating. Blow molded cases, the bane of my bloody existence, right in the fucking bucket. I got the important bits out. The charger, okay, right off the hop here. 1.5 amp output in comparison to the Milwaukee, which is 3. In comparison, apples to oranges here, to the FAP-off, which is also 3. So if in the batteries, all things being equal, the earthquake is going to take twice as long to charge the battery just by fact that the charger is rated less. And that is a weird color. Orange, but I assure you it's red. Something to do with the white balance of the camera. We'll get this charged up. In the interim, we'll get this taken apart, have a look at the innards. I'm old school when it comes to tools, buy once, cry once type deal. If when you buy a shitty tool, you're gonna buy it twice because it's gonna be shitty, you're gonna hate it, or you're gonna break it, and you're gonna end up spending more money than just going out and buying the proper tool in the first place. However, sometimes, and we've seen this in the earthquake brand from the hazard fart, sometimes you do get a good deal. Sometimes you get a sore dick deal like the Vulcan welders, what they were selling. I think they're getting away from those, maybe too good. Not enough margin on there. So just comparing apples to potatoes here, we got the FAP-off. And you'll see on the, they always play, whatever company plays to their strengths. So these guys are marketing that it's 60 foot-pounds of torque. These Milwaukee, not so worried about it, for 35 foot-pounds of torque. The FAP-off, 40 pounds of torque. Here's why that doesn't matter at all. Because when you are using a ratchet, you provide the impetus to torque up the fastener or loosen it off. If you're relying on this under power, it's not going to have the jam, and it's also going to bark your knuckles. So the torque, that's a number on the box for mouth breathers. Doesn't matter at all. What matters is the speed of actuation. And we can see here, this being 12 volt, this being 12 volt, and this being 12 volt. The speed on this guy, I believe, is 175 ripams. This guy is 250, and this guy, 275. So if you're making your living turning wrenches, you're gonna want the fastest one going because the torque doesn't matter. The torque comes from the old dick beater. Any 13-year-old boy looking through the brassiere section of the Sears catalog can tell you that. Design-wise, it's got the same chintzy little pin on the paddle switch as the Milwaukee. Yeah, this has been out, but you can see it's already walking out here. Just grab Big Clive's King Dick Jr. In this case, you can see it's that same anemic pin, but there's very little mitigation for pulling this back. Now this gets caught on something and yeah, it's already fucked. I already bent it. In this case, there's quite a bit more meat here. So if it does get pulled back, it's not nearly as prone to breaking off. Much like its brethren, the Fap-Off Ratchet, it has no stock, no lock to prevent premature discharge. And in the Milwaukee, there is a lock there, so you can lock it from turning in case you're in a tool bag or a service truck or what have you. Of course, there is no reverse on these electrically because the reverse is in the head of her. Now this is a nice big positive movement, as is the Fap-Off. Not quite as nice actually, and quite a bit stiffer, but the Milwaukee, horrific. Just about got to use your tweezers to get in there. Now your wife gonna perk up her ears at this one. This girthy black shank, stiff, and it's actual metal, aluminum, die-cast aluminum, whereas the other suspects here, plastique, which is surprising to me on account of this being the cheapest of the 129 real American doll hairs. This one for the kit, mind, $179 for the kit off Scamazon, and this guy cost you an arm and a dick. However, you don't got to cut it off all at once. You can do it on the installment plan, pay once a month like you do your rent. Because the earthquake is two-part, there tends to be a stress riser where the interface of the plastic and the metal is. And you see we've got a little bit different countenance there in order to not have a stress riser in there. Speaking of stress risers, if you look at the battery casement, there's some fasteners on all of these guys. There's two fasteners on the Fap-Off. There's a fastener down here, and then there's a little clip. No little clip. What they're relying on is actually the paddle to keep it together. Oh no, there is another fastener. My mistake. That fucked me over the last time. So two fasteners in the bottom and nothing for fasteners in the bottom of this guy. Of course, you're going to be reefing on this, and that's prone to splitting apart. But what they have done is added a couple of G's-less clips. Buy a lottery ticket, lads. Not only did I not impale the meaty part of my mitt with the O-ring pick, but the other clip went springing, and we found it. Having a look at the clamshell as we suspected. PA6, glass fiber 30%. Something different though on that butylene overmolding. It's TPR. So that's not the typical butylene styrene with the styrene at the end of the molecule. That's something else, probably a thermoplastic rubber, and that means that that's a little bit more expensive, but also less susceptible to non-polar and probably polar solvents. So that would mean that this rubber would last longer than the overmolding on this guy. It does have a slightly different feel. This guy is softer. This guy is a little bit more rigid. Just maybe a change in durometer, or just by the nature of the molecule itself, the cross-linked polymer itself. But in any case, most definitely a superior material and more expensive than this typical butylene on here. Nothing real high-tech about the pixie path on this one. See the temperature probe here for the battery over temp, and then the positive, the negative, going into the switch, and the switch is doing double duty as the brain box as well, as witnessed by the freewheel diode and a MOSFET, which has got to be just pulse width modulated in order to get your speed control. And then we have right in series, that's a breaker, a thermostatic breaker. So if the thing gets too hot, it shuts down. Now I don't know if this is naturally resettable or if it's a one-time use only. But definitely if your tool is not working, you're going to want to go ahead and replace that. Of course, in the interim, all you would need to do is just bond these two together to bypass this altogether. Now the switch has a heatsink in it, heat sinking for the MOSFET, and we can see that the body diode in the MOSFET is not capable of handling the inductive voltage spike, and we add a little diode to the externally in order to protect this from blowing up. I had a preliminary with the thumb detecting nut fucker on this nut, just a kiss my nut, nothing, no heavy petting, and I couldn't get her. So what we'll do is we'll take this, got these fancy new snap ring pliers. Look at that. See, there's a detent on there. Brilliant. I had the old plastic ones, but they plastic doesn't last. She only lasted but a couple decades and then cracked. So watch your eyes here. There we go. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Now once we get this out, before we have a proper goodly look at her, I want to get this nut splayed so that we can, I want to bust my nuts so that we can get in and get it at under the petticoats to see exactly. Why won't you fucking come? Ah! Well no, a misery wrapped in an enema. I had a proper go at her with all the tools at my disposal, including a red-hot torrent of foul language, the professional type. And I don't see how this comes apart. So I think what we'll do is we'll just hot it up in case there's some red Loctite or something on there. It appears to be threaded either onto the body or some. This appears to be caged. The nut appears to be caged by the fork. As you can see there. Yeah, I had a proper going at her. And she still wouldn't come. So, yeah. Nothing for it but to get our old buddy Terry the torch out. The day is the morrow eve. Don't call me Shirley, but I certainly can't get this thing apart, despite the liberal application of the plumber's faucet knurler and the thumb detecting nut fucker. I kind of got it moving a little wee bit, but I don't want to fix it till it's completely fucked. I think it might be too late. There's got to be, this motor doesn't come out, so there's got to be some fasteners from the bottom side, so I might just be working them loose, or she's pretty tight. And I got her up to temperature. I didn't want to cook the thing, but I did get it so the grease was smoking off, so that's got to be at least 500 Frankenstein, which is plenty enough to cook any red Loctite off. It's moving a little freer there, but I don't know. She's in there pretty tight. I ain't much of one for being licked. That is by mechanical contrivances. We got an O-ring here, and we're starting to see some right-hand thread, real fine pitch. So it might just be because this is aluminum, and it might not have been anodized. It might have just been painted. We might have galled up in the threads here. I'll just do a little sniping here with a 6-foot fucking pipe. Of course, it's not girthy enough. Story of my life. Well, whatever it is, it ain't good. I just get that feeling that we're just putting energy into a spring and waiting for it to fuck off and into a low Earth orbit, give us summer teeth on the way out. Some are here, some are there. Well, whatever we done, it's fuckered now. Pardon me. A beautiful artifact of threaded connections is if you really put your back into it. Eventually, they do get looser. Whether you're peeling the thing right half in two or it's actually coming out. Yeah, we see the vestiges of some Loctite, some sort of schmoo in there. It is cooked off, but it was still, maybe it wasn't aggressive enough with Terry the torch. All right, busted it right half in two. One of the things I noticed from the vice jaws is how soft this steel is. It is steel. It might be mild, might be some grade of mild grade of tool steel, but it definitely wasn't hardened. It's in its annealed state. It is very soft. They have taken, there's quite a bit of machining on here. The threads are nice. They've got a sleeve in here and a nice big bearing as well in order for that shaft to sit into, like so, if I could get it in there. But it's real soft, like butter. And having a comparison, quite a bit different. This is quite soft too, but you can tell it's been heat treated at the very least. Now the most important part is the gear set. A little bit different tonality there, so it's harder. Still not real hard, but this at least has been heat treated. For the shaft itself, pretty soft. That, yeah. If it is tool steel, it hasn't been heat treated particularly well. And looking at the shaft arrangement here, or the drive splines, now there is some marring there from an apprentice. But that is a non-typical spline shaft. It's very loosey-goosey in there in order to reduce the costs. Of course, you bring the tolerances, you make the tolerances real sloppy, and the costs come way down. Not that it matters, because you're just driving torque and it's located by that bearing. But it just goes to show that they are building these down to a price. Now here's the gear arrangement, and we got lots of grease in there, a nice grape drink sent to her. And we got the sun gear driving the planets driving the carrier, and the carrier driving this blind shaft onto the Weeble Wobble shaft, what actually makes the thing chooch. We can see in the casement are slotted the ring gear, the outside ring gear, and it goes a little something like that. So we just have one reduction in there, one planet carrier, big beefy planet carrier for driving this blind shaft, and then we'll have some fasteners there that'll hold in that little brushed DC motor. This is just a typical little hobby motor, nothing serious, 12 volts. Now for the drive arrangement, we've got this preload thrust bushing here, thrust washer, machine turned and hardened. A couple of detent balls backed by springs. The mechanism itself, this guy, if you have a look at the texture, looks like it's been forged. You see that, you know, it hasn't been turned down, so forged and then turned to size on the length. Just dropped a ball there. We see the ratcheting pawls, the dogs and pawls, are already pre-rounded over, so that's good, so that we don't get little slivers of material popping off and cocking up the works. Just got a regular little detent ball here, and then machined all through here. This is an interesting machining process. If you have a look at that, it wasn't cut. It wasn't cut with an end mill. It looks like they had one of those machines, CNC machines, what'll go in and out with the tool to square that off. There's a term for that, but it's not a rotary tool. The workpiece is turning. If you'd focus, you fuck. Focus, you fuck. There we go. What do you tell the camera? It's got two black eyes. Synchronous rotational polygonal cutters. So essentially this guy's turning and there's a cutter what comes in here, and the geometry is such that it's synced with the spindle of the lathe. and then it just whips across and cuts any kind of shape you want. It's very interesting. You can do cutting of flats and different shapes other than perfectly round. You know, you can do cams and so forth with this technique. It only works on CNC. Well, it doesn't only work on CNC, but primarily a CNC high-tech lathe what does that. Something to consider, you're poking around in a tight, nasty spot, which that's generally always on my mind, is the size of the head. Now recall, this Milwaukee non-fuel version, real anemic, small head on her. And if, according to the comments, lots of warranties and lots of guys busting the pin, the drive pin off, just due to the sheer size of it. It's quite small, tight spots, good. Fap off, you see, this big, oh lordy, coming chungus. This is the fuel, and the size of that, mind you, it is the 1/2 inch drive, but the 3/8 is the same size. And this fits in betwixt the between of these. So kind of a good middle of the road one. Of course, if you're super into it, you'd get the long version with the small head, and then you'd get the sort of medium size, I imagine. This snap-on looks like the best balance of all the worlds. Quite tidy, but big enough to be able to, well, I haven't had the pin apart, so I won't say that, but it looks to be the right size. This one may be a little bit chunky, but they probably have to overbuild it because whatever material they're using in there, it's very, very soft. If I had my file, if this is hardened as well. No, so that might be a red herring on my part. That thing is soft, super soft. The snap-on, a little bit harder. It has been heat treated. Likely this one, this guy. Now this is hard. This is very hard. So that might be why they can get away with using such a small head, because it's actually a better grade of steel and they've gone ahead and heat treated it. This guy, totally soft. This guy, completely soft. This guy, fair to middling. I just noticed this about the switch. You see it's cantilevered out there and it's not really well supported. It is shrouded by the paddle switch, but you see how much meat is there if you do hook that on something. There's not much in the way of holding that together. So that might be a concern. You break that. 90-day warranty on these guys. They used to have pretty good warranties. I think it's still no questions, no quibbles asked, but it is only 90 days, so you be aware of that. Getting into the battery here, we see we got 3 18650 lithium cells in series. Seeing as how this is rated for 12 volts, 2 ampere hours, that means that these are both, all 3 of these are 2000 milliamp hour rated batteries. So we'll get in and see. I believe they're high quality, and what tells me that is that the cells are made in Korea and processed in Taiwan. Both expensive labor countries. Now they see you coming here, emblazoned PA6, glass fiber reinforced 30%. Same with this. Now you just look at them. They're, if I had to guess, I would guess these are different materials. So they're trying to, well, let's see. Let's see what they're trying to do. This guy to me looks for all the world like ABS, but it does have glass fiber in there. And this guy, same. Do a little battery ASMR. Well, the only thing for it we can do is the sniff test. We'll get the, well, we got the Heiko hotting up. Quite a tidy little set here, LG AA. Now there is an LG DA I can find specs on, but nothing on this LGA. There seem to be 2000 milliamp hours, as I said, rated for 25 amps of output. You see just two spot welds, resistance welds. So maybe not the best affixation for the terminal. However, it's so nicely packed in there, and it's even got a little bit of a preload with a closed cell urethane foam with a self-adhesive backing on there just to keep it preloaded. And we have all the balancing lines. I think that's not a bad cell at all. One thing I am interested in though is making sure that this is not ABS plastique. We're just going to do the sniff test. It's so shiny it doesn't. I have a whiff at this guy. It does have a different top note, maybe a different blender or a supplier. Vaguely, it's pretty close though. So I would say, yeah, that is nylon. Now there's 50 bucks in the difference, 40 bucks in the difference between the Earthquake and the low-grade Milwaukee. Now this guy, if and you already got the, you're already buying the Gillette razors, you already got the batteries, pretty tough case to go and buy a bunch of new batteries over, because batteries are so bloody expensive. But all things being equal, I consider this a perfectly adequate Ratchet, very robust. It's the only one of the bunch that's got the metal casement. And fit and finish wise, it really ain't teabag. It's quite simple on the electronics. Simple is better. A lot of times you get these tools and the trigger craps out of them, or the drive board craps out of them, and then after a few years you can't get spare parts for the Jesus thing. You got to throw it out, get you a new one. So for the 50 bucks in the difference, I would actually go over to the Stink Factory and buy one of these. However, if you're like me, you got the cock and balls of a bull moose, you can afford to lop off a couple inches. This guy, just for the fact that the head is quite small. Now, I haven't had this A part, just been using it to tighten and untighten the vise, but I like the feel of it. As far as the Milwaukee Fuel, the Fuel version, real heavy, real big in the gland end, so it might be super beefy, but you're gonna have a lot of trouble getting it into places. So for me, on the old Haas power machine there, no big deal, because there's plenty of access room. But if you're wrenching on a vehicle or something, you're gonna have lots of places where this will not go. So cost-wise, I actually think, yeah, this guy is quite a bit better value than any of these. However, if you're making a living with your tools, chances are you're going to want something, well, I wouldn't hesitate to tell you to give this thing a try. It's reasonably robust, and for the price of her compared to its competition, it ain't teabag. Thanks for watching. Keep your dick in a vise.